everyone, and welcome back to the Forbidden Dinner Table, where we talk about all the topics that you are not supposed to talk about at the family dinner table. My name is Alex.
And my name is Zach. Welcome to the show. We may sound a little different today because this is a special episode for us. We're doing this one live in person, so we're in the same room. Normally, we would just kind of record over the web, like I said in a previous episode. I live in Minnesota. Alex lives in Texas. We're actually both home for the holidays in the same room. We get to look at each other's faces for this one.
This is going to be an interesting conversation with like visual cues and things going on.
So it'll be a good one too. We've got a fun topic ahead of us. Definitely not a shallow topic. We're going to be diving into consciousness and the ideas of biocentrism today, which is a topic I've been sort of grappling with over the last 3 months. Not an expert by any means, but want to just kind of talk through what I've learned on the topic, some views on it, and get your thoughts on some things. But before we dive into that, Alex, I know we talked about in previous episodes kind of hitting timelies, this idea of what is relevant kind of in the news right now or current events. And it's my understanding you have one. I have no idea what it is.
I do. I have one timely. So actually, we're going to go back to a previous episode. We're going to go back to our idea of prep kitchens, strictly designated for meal pickup. And we had talked a little bit about different companies potentially working together. So you might have different fast food companies all in one kitchen so that, you know, a delivery driver can come pick up different things. I was talking to a listener and they mentioned that they went to a place that was sort of like this and had 3 or 4 different fast food companies in one location, one drive-through window. And it got me thinking to where we may have missed a piece where a lot of these different fast food brands are owned by one hierarching company. So think like Yum Brands, right? Sure. So you could probably easily, and already do have, according to this listener, something like a Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC, all in one spot, all one kitchen, employees running around making all of the different food. So I just wanted to call that out and say that's actually happening, but it's within the umbrella of a larger company.
I'm curious, I would imagine from a fixed cost perspective, you have like one griddle, right? And
I should have asked. I don't know the intricacy of it, but I think you would have like the specialized things that it would take to make all the different food, but probably one flat top grill. Yeah.
There's no need to replicate 4 kitchens in that.
Exactly. Yeah, and they were specific to say one drive-through window. So you could get, you know, a KFC bucket with a Taco Bell taco and a deep dish pizza, and then all handed through one window. And so one person or a couple people were making all these different things. So that exists, but it's under one umbrella company.
Sounds like a drunk person's heaven.
Yes, it does.
We don't need to drive around. You don't need a designated driver to drive around.
One spot.
One stop. I'm getting, you know, a giant pizza and a
Crunch Wrap.
A Crunch Wrap Supreme in the same order.
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to bring up. We were touching on something that apparently does exist in some capacity.
We'll see what the future and door dashing and how the internet continues that trend kind of forward.
Indeed.
It was interesting too. I talked with somebody else after recording that podcast. It got me thinking about like platforms as that intermediary and how like even when you're replacing or eliminating a step, you're putting a platform in. So there's almost like in some platforms can eliminate many steps, but in other ways you're actually just swapping. Like the net amount of steps is the same, but the platform operates in a different capacity.
I see the difference, though, of being if you're inserting a platform instead of a one step and then onto like one road leading to the next step. With the internet, that intermediary step that you might even be adding is more than just one road and could branch out into a bunch of different roads just based on sort of how communication and things are set up.
It's true.
So it's still kind of an upgrade.
Oh, yeah, definitely a change and an upgrade and an enhancement. And I guess it depends on how you look at it. If you talk to people who work in like the gig economy and dashers, I've heard some people say like, oh, this is fantastic. And other people be like, this is awful. And the fact that it's replaced many jobs and replaced the life, you know, of like being a normally delivery person for some type of restaurant now is just replaced by this whole kind of gray platform with no benefits, right? Is unfortunate.
Change isn't easy, but it also, I feel like, has lowered the barrier to entry, which feels like a net positive, but you're making a good point of if you're a gig worker, you're not fully employed, and there are some different problems maybe that come with that.
Yeah. But
Well, I don't want to spend too much time on
Let's
this. Yeah, that was all I really had. I know you have a whole list of topics you want to get into, so let's do it.
yeah, let's get into biocentrism. So this is a massive topic, one that I've been thinking about for a while, and I've actually been thinking a little bit about how do I even introduce this topic. And I thought of a couple different ways, but the way that I want to try and do this at least is just to find it out of the gate instead of trying to like set it up through many pieces, because I feel like if I try to set it up through many pieces, the whole time everyone's going to be like, okay, but what is it? Like, what am I looking for in what you're setting up? Why is this relevant? So I'm also going to be doing this basically off the tab of like kind of my personal definitions of things. So maybe we'll have to stop and actually look up some definitions of words, but I'm giving you sort of my take or interpretation of a lot of this.
And I'll try to then play the part of the viewer and ask for clarification or make sure that things are coming across in an understandable way.
Please do. There is a risk that I'm going to be chasing a lot of rabbits on this one. So I'm going to lean on you, Alex, to say, if you ask me a good question and I start answering it and going down the line, reel me in and be like, how does this apply to the question?
Let that rabbit go.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so at the most fundamental or shortest way that I can describe biocentrism is that life is at the center of everything, and that the one sort of main piece that gets turned upside down on its head is that instead of there being a universe in which through particles bouncing around in matter and through natural selection and just a whole long list of things coming together, that which consciousness emerges from that. You know, you sort of have the Big Bang and the Earth comes together, and then you have creatures that over time develop consciousness. What if instead of the universe creating consciousness, instead consciousness creates the universe? So we're starting from a different building block. A different way to say this is, instead of consciousness being an emergent property, it's a fundamental property all along of this wacky thing we call reality.
You're building a different foundation.
Yes, exactly. And just to kind of give an example about what an emergent property is, as a kind of cool, just little example, or how I think about it, the idea of something being wet is an emergent property that is, it emerges when something like water exists in a universe or a box. So things can't be wet without water. The concept of wetness emerges once water is introduced into the box. So you can think about natural selection and as creatures get complex, consciousness emerges. Well, what if instead of not emerging, it was there the whole time fundamentally?
You might be getting into this, but is there a thought then on consciousness actively creating creatures?
Well,
maybe I'm jumping ahead.
No, that's a good question. And some of these things, I sort of say that's a good question, an area we need to explore because I don't have defined answers. But let me give a few points as to why I don't think this idea should be laughed out of the room. Because I think it's kind of a radical idea, right? A ton of our science is built around the idea that, like, I believe it's called materialism, like things exist out there in the relevant world completely removed from us, right? And instead introducing this idea of like, well, it's really only all there because, or alongside consciousness. It's like, all right, you got to build a little bit of a case as to why do I even deserve spending some time thinking about this? And I've got two kind of key points to me that are like, this is why it shouldn't be laughed out of the room. The less impactful case is just the idea of fine-tuning and the idea that the universe that we live in that gives space for life or for complex organisms and creatures to exist, the fact that it's tuned so perfectly, means that if consciousness is there from the beginning and sort of having its hand somehow in the movement of all of this, those have to be sort of fixed points, because you can't imagine really a world where that doesn't exist, because consciousness sort of isn't going to emerge, or sort of isn't going to, I don't even want to say emerge because that makes it sound like it's getting created there. Like, if it's sort of playing a guiding hand, it absolutely makes sense that the universe is set up in a way that life can exist.
or the pieces fit together.
Yes. Because I'll personally, just as a quick aside, that's something, as somebody who struggles with the question of does a God exist, that one stumps me a little bit. of like if something came from nothing in that sort of nature, why is it all so perfectly fit for the universe? Is an interesting topic that causes me to pause, and is something I hope we can cover in a later episode and really dive into that fine-tuning. But I think the fact that sort of if you say, well, consciousness has a piece of this all along from the beginning blocks and not as something that just emerges, it makes sense then that you've got fine-tuned pieces that make sense for life because it's part of there from the beginning. That's the lesser powerful argument, in my opinion. The more powerful argument gets into, and again, not an expert in this area, gonna just kind of be skimming the pieces of this, is around sort of the fundamentals of quantum mechanics and the idea of the measurement problem or the observer effect. So I'm gonna go into something that's kind of my understanding the bare bones or the real structure of quantum mechanics. The most famous example in quantum mechanics, which is the double slit experiment, which is a question really of, does light act as a wave or a particle? Which, spoiler alert, the answer is yes. There's particle wave duality. But to get sort of into the idea of, well, why does consciousness matter so much, or why does an observer matter so much? There are experiments where if you picture sort of a sheet of paper, and on one side of it you've got this kind of particle gun that's shooting particles. If you are running the particles through the two slits, and you have sort of a recorder or like a sheet behind the actual paper with the slits, and you're observing how the particles land on that, we'll call it the observer sheet, it looks like a wave. You see the particles landing in these different bands that show as if the particles are moving through like a ripple, and they're going through both slits at the same time and interacting with each other to get this effect that on the observer sheet you see, okay, there's some type of, the particle is going through both slits and there's a wave, which is puzzling. Why is this particle acting like a wave? And led scientists to then put detectors on the slits to see, we want to see how this is happening. But when you put the detector on the slit and turn it on to observe, to watch which slit the particle is going through, the outcome, or what you're seeing on that observer sheet, the recorder, changes to just be two bands. You either see particles go through slit A or slit B. That's puzzling. The scientists thought, okay, potentially this means that just by putting the detector on the slits, that may have changed something. What if we turn the detector off? By turning the detector off, the observer sheet then gets the outcome when you shoot the particles like a wave again, like they're going through both slits and interacting with each other. The fundamental piece of that is by observing the experiment, you've changed the outcome. Just by like putting it on and tracking and measuring where the particle is going, you've changed what is happening in terms of where the particle is observing the particle go through one of the slits.
Okay, so let me maybe
break that down a little bit.
Yeah, let me maybe like take it a step down, or a little bit more basic.
Simplify.
It's kind of Schrodinger's cat.
So Schrodinger came up with this crazy example of superposition because at the time, my understanding is he wanted to show the ludicrousness of what people are saying in terms of a particle being in superposition, two spots at once. If you remember the Schrodinger cat analogy, so if you put a cat in a box, and I believe the basic example is like you have a Geiger counter and a nuclear sort of something that is creating radiation where it's completely random as to when the atom is going to have a reaction to it. So you can't predict when this atom is going to break and when potentially that breaking would cause like a poison to spell out and kill the cat. Completely random event happening in the box with the cat. So once you seal it up, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time because you don't know what's happening there with the complete randomness. And then once you open the box, you see the cat is alive or dead. Schrodinger made that claim of like superposition because he thought it was a ridiculous idea until the math and the outcomes actually showed it.
Yep.
And now the example that he came up with is actually taught as like, this is what superposition is for elements or particles, really. Yeah, no,
it is quantum mechanics or quantum computing. So again, another pass for if anyone's still confused. You have is it a particle?
Yeah.
It's a particle. And in short, I'm going to really, really try to simplify this.
Please do.
It's, there's a column A and a column B, and the particle can be any combination of both, basically, a little column A, a little column B. Might be 99% one, 1% the other. It might be 50-50. It could be any number of those things, but as soon as you observe, or as soon as you like take a picture of it, it will be A or B.
Yes.
But when you're not observing, it's a little bit of both, and that's the superposition that Zach is referring to.
Yes, it's acting like a wave. It's I believe this.
Which even that is
the more scientific way to say this, but trying to simplify it to basic is like there's a probability of where the particle will be, and then when you observe, then that particle is one or the other when you take that snapshot. To which I just want to kind of sneak in here. There's something called the measurement problem, which is when does the observation happen? So like, let's say, for example, you have the detectors on those slits and you see when it happens. Is that when the observation happens? And if nobody observed that data for 2 years, has it been decided?
That's a good question.
Versus, is it when the eyes observe? Or is it when the consciousnness?
Because this could change the outcome.
Exactly. So there's that, and we don't know. Scientists don't know the answer of like when something is considered measured. Which it frustrates me in the most positively scientific way when you think about like this idea of you can't capture something or you can't question something until like you have it seen in your consciousness, because then you get into this idea of like by ever trying to prove anything else, it's impossible because by looking at it, you've ruined the piece.
So I'm probably going to tell you right now to let this rabbit go because I don't want to get bogged down. And if we could ever have like a quantum computing expert on or something, that would be fantastic. But I think for the sake of your argument, we've gotten about as far as we can.
Okay, so why does this all matter? How does this all tie back? Great question. So biocentrism, the idea that instead of the universe creating consciousness, consciousness creates the universe. Why shouldn't that idea be laughed out of the room? Because we see in scientific experiments, the true nature of observing something changes the outcome. So to me, what I'm taking away from that is the consciousness or the observation of something, the natural world, solidifies the natural world.
So I think what you're saying though is like when we're observing, to go back to our previous example, we're seeing A or B, but there could be so much more happening behind the scenes that we can't observe because when we do, it's either A or B.
Right.
Yeah.
A great sort of layman's term example of this, which again sounds ridiculous, and I acknowledge this, is the idea that when you're sleeping in your bedroom, your fridge is just a shimmering probability, and then when you turn the lights on in your kitchen, it's solidified as your fridge.
Oh, okay.
Which is a weird thing to think about, but sort of starts to get like, all right, I could see the implications of this up to a macro level.
Yeah.
Again, very weird.
Weird. I mean, that's a thing in 3D space. But I see your point of, without observing it, I can't be 100% sure that it's there or not.
Right.
And the only way that I can be sure is to go look at it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I follow.
So I'm making a big jump that if instead of the universe creating consciousness, consciousness is creating the universe, and we let that have a seat at the table, it's a new perspective or lens to look through, like, what is a good life or what are we all doing here? Because I start thinking about the concept of, if we're kind of, air quotes, meant to be here all along, right? It's just exploring a space and like you find meaning in your own things in your life. And I mean, this is a little bit sort of like absurdism of like everything is absurd and what matters in life is what you give meaning to. So,
okay, but let me make sure I understand, because I was going to stop you, but you might have answered the question. But just high level, what do you think, what is our purpose here?
So I don't think we have a purpose. I think literally the point is to ride the merry-go-round around in one life.
The point is to ride the ride.
Yes. To kind of simplify it up another level, the point is to ask the question, what makes a good life? Like I've almost thought of like, we are having this conversation right now about like, what is a good life? What are we all doing here? People have that conversation in different ways of like, what matters? What is the most important to you? And I almost think like that's sort of coming up to the surface for a breath of air, almost of like, checking in with that, and then you go and get distracted in other things in life. But the whole time you're thinking like, I'm doing this because it's a good life, or like some people become physics professors because they think that's what it means to sort of be a good life. Some people become teachers. Some people get a little bit confused or lost and become bank robbers. But like we're all sort of playing with this question of like, what are we doing here and what does it matter? But that's the whole point of the game. is to have a look at what does it mean to be here and what does it mean to live a good life.
I have a similar thought. Maybe I would use different words. I think I've told you before, a lot of people are looking for like, what is my purpose here or something like that, to which my answer is it's not about you. It's about the collective, which is sort of what you're talking about too. It's sort of about humanity learning and growing and advancing, and everybody plays a part of that, but like no individual one has more purpose than the other. So even the person that would try to argue that they don't do anything and all they do is like, I don't know, raise their kids and go to the grocery store. It's like, no, that matters though, because that's a pattern and you're one of many patterns, and therefore like it bubbles all the way up to the top. And so humanity's doing one thing. We just talked about earlier how technology can disrupt those patterns, and then all of a sudden it might split that group of people into two, and some people are doing pattern A and pattern B, and all of a sudden one of those patterns wins out. That's all part of the growth and the advancement to me of what the overall purpose is, but like you can't put into words what anybody's individual purpose is.
Yeah, I think about when we've talked this in the past, not in front of a mic. I think you said something along the lines of like, even just what you buy.
Yep.
Like you vote with your wallet, like
Yep.
you're inputting into the human culture.
You're contributing to the advancement of society just by your purchasing patterns. Yeah, because you're voting what's good and what's bad, and ultimately your vote gets tallied up with a lot of others, and then humanity goes one way or the other. And so all of it matters. It's just that nobody can put into words like why one individual life might matter more than a different one.
Yeah.
It's almost all data, which is kind of a bad way to boil it down.
Well,
but
it's
like
culture. I think of it as culture. We're all sort of voting and pulling culture in different directions.
Yeah, that's a better, yeah.
And yeah, so when people sort of say like, well, what matters, what makes a good life, it's sort of, I say, what matters to you? What do you want to put forward to live a good life? Because there's really no, I was about to say there's no right or wrong answer, but I will say if you're hurting other people, that's a tough sell as to why.
But then, see, in my example, hopefully the majority of people will negatively react to you if you're hurting people, therefore steering humanity in like away from what's bad or what some might consider evil or something like that. Like it's still being voted on almost, if you will, even though there's someone out there doing terrible things. But think about terrible tragedies and things, and most people can agree that's bad. Great, that's humanity together deciding we don't want to go down that road, we're going to go down this other road. And that's growth and development of culture and things like you're saying too.
Or just reacting, to something out of control. I mean, I think like tragedy, there's a lot of times there's a human element, but there are tragedies without human elements, like natural disasters, pandemics.
Yeah, I was thinking more human element, but you're right. Yeah, well, and the things that are not human elements might kick us into gear to do something about it, which is, again, impacting us almost the same way. You're just steering this giant ship that we're all on. We're just navigating the waters, basically, is like the purpose of life, really boiled down.
Right, and so navigating the waters, I'm saying in a slightly different way of like your purpose is to enjoy all of it, enjoy the heartbreak, it's tough to say like enjoy the loss of a child. That's probably the wrong way to say it, but like live in it, experience it. That's a better way to say it.
Yeah, there's something cool about just feeling, and people hate pain and heartbreak and all those things, and this is so hard to do, but if you're in the moment and you go, how cool is it though that I can feel what this feels like?
Yeah,
because that's rare in organic life, if you will, right? But like maybe, I don't know if animals can do it or not, probably to some extent, but it is pretty cool that we can feel all these different things, even though some of them suck.
Yeah. As somebody who dabbles in sort of meditation and Zen, and I've been having conversations with people, somebody older, sort of a Zen mentor of mine, brought up a really good point, which is meditation or Zen, really Zen at the heart of it is, it's not blocking out feelings. It's, he's saying like somebody who's really good at Zen isn't going to feel less of a heartbreak, but they're going to sort of just live in that moment, and they're not going to worry about fears or feelings on top of the feelings. I call that like a derivative of feelings, or like once removed, of like, I'm not going to stress about the heartbreak, or I'm not going to feel sad that I'm feeling the heartbreak or anything like that, or worry about it. I'm just going to live in the moment. And that's helped me a little bit of like, and why I think meditation is so powerful, because you can just sit with things. And in some ways you just sit with your emotions and check in. In other ways, also meditation is great to just like bring you back to the present, right? Of like, these are the things that do matter. And so, yeah, there's kind of weird dotted lines in my mind of like biocentrism and the point of like, life is at the center of it, and we're all just here on the merry-go-round. And the important thing is to remember, well, what we know is you get one ride on the merry-go-round, and to really experience that to its fullest.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I read something today that was actually, I thought, very profound, in that anger can only be felt with another emotion. Anger itself doesn't just manifest. It's like a secondary tack on to some other emotion that you're feeling. Whether that's sadness, or I tried to boil it down to betrayal or jealousy, but anger itself doesn't just pop in. There has to be some other emotion accompanying it, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and when I think about when I'm most angry in my life, to me the word that comes attached with it is defensiveness. So if I'm presenting something at work and somebody starts picking apart my ideas or belittling the work, I start to feel angry. And it's actually probably the biggest impact or thing that I've been able to take home with starting and doing meditation is I notice the anger starting to rise, and you can catch it and say, oh, I'm getting angry.
That's interesting.
And then you can respond to it. Right?
You're contextualizing things that almost so that you can point them out.
Exactly. And then I can sort of say, my goal is to not just shove the anger back down and not experiencing it. I'm going to let it sort of be like, oh, I'm getting angry right now because I put a ton of work into this document, and my boss is sort of ripping it apart like I only spent 5 minutes on it when really I spent hours crafting it. And so my goal now is to control, and I won't let the anger seep out of me to lash out and be like, well, and cause an abrupt chaos with my, and ruin the relationship with my boss in that moment. But it's interesting when you talked about anger being with something. Immediately, I started thinking it was like, when I get defensive, the anger starts to rise.
Yeah, anger doesn't just show up. There has to be something else along with it. But
you want to get a little weird for a second on this too?
Let's do it.
As if we weren't enough. Okay, so I'm going to step into a box where if you painted me up against a wall and you're like, Zach, did you really think this? Or is this the model that you use to operate your life? I will tell you flat out in the beginning, the answer is no. But I like to get weird sometimes and think like, what if this was true?
From a previous episode, let's explore the space.
Let's explore this space. So I commented about like what we know we get one ride around on this merry-go-round, kind of concept of what happens after death. Well, if biocentrism is true and consciousness is there all along, right? It starts leading into an interesting space of like, well, when you die, what happens if that consciousness is still there? And I've been playing with this different stuff, and here's one idea that I have, which is the idea that consciousness sort of is this, like, the best word I can think of is like hive mind behind a ton of stuff. And this is where the sort of, I'm going to try and stay surface level with this, like the concept of self comes in, which is a huge thing in Zen and meditation of like, what is the self? But when you die, when Alex Martin dies, Alex Martin's memories go away, all of that sort of stuff goes away, but yet the like consciousness of you sort of floats back into the hive mind. I believe religious people would describe it as the spirit, right? And
yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like.
Right, and so this is where I've been thinking about, well, okay, is it possible that just when you die, there's still some element of you, I'm putting you in brackets because the whole like collection of Alex Martin has died, but then the like essence of consciousness goes back into this somewhat hive mind. Now, I would differentiate myself from religion in that when I talk to religious people, they still have this concept of like you as Alex Martin will be in the afterlife, and like potentially if I died, I could interact with Alex Martin and that sort of thing. My claim or idea, right, is like there's no Alex Martin in the afterlife, but there's the like component of life that still returns to its source, I'm gonna say.
Yeah, well, I've thought about this a little bit too. It's like my spirit, for lack of a better word. But I've actually thought about this too, about like when you die, what if your consciousness just goes and tries to find another host? Which is a little bit different way to think about it. And it's like all the dead spirits are like fighting to go find another body or host or something.
To go into.
Yeah, to go into. And then, you know, your memories and things don't carry with you, but your consciousness just moves on.
Right. So like there's the concept of you, but it's not anything, it's not Alex Martin.
Yeah,
If
right.
that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. So this new idea that is really kind of in my idea, and I think, oh, this is so cool, but also so frustrating. I feel like we live in a little bit of a binary thought process right now in society where there's the thought of like, well, when you die, you either get buried and it's lights out and literally nothing happens. None of this even like spirit consciousness, or the idea of like, you go to a place like heaven and sort of all of your answers, like all of your questions have answers.
Sure.
What I'm starting to think about is actually some type of middle space that seems more likely, which is big if. If it's not lights out and it's something else, you enter a space then where not all of your questions are answered. Like, what if you enter this new domain where there's a bunch of other people who've died there, and you're flying around now, and they're like, okay, what do I do now in this stage of quote unquote life, or like, you know, what existence we'll call it? And they're like, oh, we just kind of like check things out or haunt people or show up as orbs.
I was going to say, I think some would argue that that's what ghosts are. Is
Right.
They just don't know what to do next, or haven't figured it out, or the answer hasn't been given to them.
Right. But now instead of sort of, you've got an answer to the question of like, okay, there is an existence after death. But then now imagine factions of ghosts. Some that are like, our religion here on this new plane is that we haunt people. And then you've got another faction that's like, no, don't haunt anyone. We have these books that say it's bad to haunt people. And like this idea that you just have a whole new set of questions.
I'm picturing like ghosts at the DMV being like, wait, do I have the right form? And they're like, no, I'm sorry. You need to go down over here. And all the ghosts are like, what are we doing here? We don't know. Like,
Is this a government sanctioned
chaos.
haunting?
Yeah. Everyone's just confused and don't know where to go.
But so, like, I mean, the more I think about this, the more this seems likely that if there is a next level after death, we won't get all of our answers, and we'll just have new questions.
That's an interesting thought. I've never thought about that. If you just get new questions.
Right.
Is that ghost in charge? Who voted him in?
As soon as you die, you just see something flash on your eyes that goes, level 2.
You're like, shit. How many levels are there?
Yeah, so.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, I've never, I'll have to kind of reflect on that a little bit. I've never really thought about there being a middle ground where there still aren't any answers.
So this has actually changed my, like, it hasn't changed my relationship. It has me thinking about different things when I'm like going out for a run and I see animals or things in the wild. Like if I see a chipmunk, or surprisingly when I go for runs in Minnesota, I see deer a lot and they sort of just eye you up and look at you. And as I run past them, I think like, are we made of the same essence? Like at the end of the day, like is there, I would extend that quote unquote hive mind to like more than just humans. And this idea of like, when we both die, am I going to go up there and like, I get more of an understanding of what it means to be a deer? I don't know. These are the weird thoughts that I have on mile 3.
So you're taking more than just humans into this equation.
Yes.
So, but that's kind of interesting. So actually, I thought about this too when we were talking about like moving to another host, in where you'd be dealt a different hand of genetics, so to speak, right? And maybe this host isn't as smart or not as tall or something like that, right? Like what makes me are some of those things, and those would go away. Mm-hmm. And now you're bringing animals into it, which would be really funny if your like consciousness mind like slides into an earthworm or something, and it's just like, oh, this thing doesn't know anything that's going on. Like all it wants to do is dig. But that's interesting to kind of throw all of it into one giant basket.
So negative thoughts to come out of this is like the idea that if you just kill yourself, you get thrown back into the output machine, that you'll get dealt another hand.
Yeah.
Which, if this turns out to be wrong, terrible theory to have going.
Yeah, don't just like, I can just hit reset.
Exactly. So like,
don't do that.
That's one thing that I've thought about. The other thing too, sort of, is like,
I'm going to be a dolphin.
or if you come back, yeah. The other idea actually too is like, this makes sense then that we're all of the same cloth, or we're all of the same thing. We're like, you and I are like at its middle, like the essence of life form, the same, but you're just a version that has Alex Martin's memories and
well, the different form of genetics or whatever. Yeah, like this body has seen different things.
Exactly. But and then well, so to get into a little bit of a touch religion a little bit with this, one concept of hell that I've heard that I actually really like the idea, resonate, it's a very creative idea, is that after you die, you just live out your life again, not from your own viewpoint, but from the viewpoint of everybody you've interacted with, experiencing their emotions. So if you're a very kind person, you get to live life feeling the
hell's
kindness.
Not so bad.
Right, but if you're super mean to people, you will experience like the other side of being hurt, like over and over again. To which
interesting.
My first thought was like, Hitler's in for a
Yeah,
ride.
that was my first thought too. I'm like, well, if anybody hated anyone more, it's that guy.
Yeah.
Like,
so I thought that's a very creative way to think about
that is
hell.
interesting. Not even hell, but just even the afterlife. Because if you do good, you get to experience your life and feel the good things that you had done to other people, and it kind of goes both ways. That is very interesting.
I think it's funny too, because when I shared this idea with somebody, now afterwards, if we're like in an argument or a tense space, there'll be a pause and they'll be like, well, you'll get it when you die. Like, you'll understand my viewpoint when you die, and you live your life from my perspective.
There is a weird element here too with kids who seem a little bit more maybe in touch with this hive mind or something, because I know I've heard stories of kids, and we have a family member like this as well, who have seen documentaries or things like that and had reactions about like, oh, I was there, or that wasn't over there, it was over here. And you're like, what? Like, you don't even know what this documentary is about, and they have like hard opinions on stuff. It's eerie. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen examples of that, but
the only example I can think of is somebody that I talked to where apparently from like the ages of, I'm going to guess like 3 to 9, roughly, as a ballpark, they like carried a Bible around and had like super strong connection to like religion and different things, like Amelia Earhart, like this like intense like relationship with it, to be like enough to the point where the parents said like, you are weirdly as a child like drawn to that.
Yeah, it's almost like that consciousness, whatever spirit is still pulling maybe from its previous memories or something like that. We've had family members, I think it was the Titanic. This kid was seeing like a documentary or maybe even the movie or something, and was like, oh, that was the engine room. And they were like, what? And he's like, yeah, there were these engines and I was over here doing this thing that was like off screen, but then they cut to it, or it must have been a documentary. And he like described something before the documentary got to it. And they were like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And it was weird for this kid to like have an opinion on this particular historical thing.
Workings of the Titanic. I will say, my Carl Sagan, big hero of mine, things like this, he commented on as like a skeptic. He's like, this needs to be researched more. Like these relationships with, like, you know, other connections, or like, you know, after near-death experiences and things like that. He had talked about, even from a scientific lens, of like, there's a lot of evidence here that needs to be sorted through and
or at least enough common experience that should, like, there are questions and something's there. Speaking of common experience, what's the next thing on the list there, Zach?
So when we sat down, Alex and I plan out topics. We don't go into any conversations ahead of time. So like I knew we had a timely. I didn't know what it was going to be. He asked me to write down something. I have no idea what it is. I just have machine elves written down on this piece of paper. So you're gonna have to unpack this one for me, Alex. I'm very curious.
Gladly. And it actually, I couldn't have had a better segue, because machine elves, as I understand, are a result of taking psychoactive drugs, something like DMT. And I've heard DMT users talk about this and share common experiences, and you can research this, you can read about it. Apparently, this is a common thing with people that do a certain kind of drug and reach a certain kind of plane, if you will. I put that in scare quotes. But apparently this is very common. So people go under and have this drug and have this psycho experience. And there are these elves, machine elves, or someone was describing it as like a jester, or there are these like creatures that you can interact with and will talk to you about your life and try to answer questions about the universe and things. And this is common. Just like near-death experiences seem common among, if you read enough stories,
Sure.
These things seem common if you read enough stories about people taking hard psycho drugs.
Let me read this back to you to make sure I'm following along.
Yeah.
I take a hard
Take
DMT, something like that. I feel like I'm on another plane of existence, and I can interact with creatures that are sort of running around making things click along the universe.
Well, they'll like talk to you and tell you everything's going to be okay, or your dead family member is in a better place now. Don't worry about them. These types of interactions.
Has people described what they look like?
Yeah, you can Google it.
And they're elf-like?
Yeah. And it varies. I've heard people say mine was like a jester and he was kind of a prankster, but we still chatted. I've heard others say that they were like in these, not machines, but contraptions or something of how they were. I mean, you're on drugs. Let's just keep that in mind. and among all the like geometric shapes and prisms and things that a psycho drug with, there are these creatures that exist there, which was leading me into this conscious discussion of like, there could be more out there that we can't even comprehend or fathom, or is this just people's brains reacting similarly to a drug?
Right. That sort of, it's how I think about near-death experiences of.
Could be the same.
We touched on this of like, is there a common thread when you die of like, absent of religion, this is what sort of the next step of existence looks like? Or is there a commonality that when the brain is shutting down, you have this experience?
Right. So this fits into that category, though, of is it just a similar experience because your brain is on drugs? Or are there these energy, I don't want to say animals per se, but beings or something? Is there something there that we can't comprehend unless we get the right doses of things and our brain goes to this other spot? Or I don't know.
Yeah.
It is interesting, though. Everyone, by the way, you should Google these machine elves, and you'll get images, drawings. People will come back down and draw what they saw, and it's somewhat common, or at least the story is common. And yeah, it is very fascinating.
No matter how you slice it, it's an interesting manifestation of consciousness or an interaction with consciousness.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that ties nicely over into something that I've been thinking about lately. So let me start. I'm going to start this off with a question or two. Have you ever had a lucid dream?
Yes, I have.
How often would you roughly say?
Oh,
once
man.
a year? Once a month?
Maybe once every 6 months.
Okay, I would say I fall probably same into that category, maybe once every 4 months or something like that. I would say.
And just because it turns lucid, it might be the last 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Or it could be the last 5 minutes, or it varies.
Yeah. And a quick terminology piece for you. Lucid dreams defined as when you are in a dream and you know you are dreaming. It's very common for when all of a sudden you realize you're in a dream. One of two things happens. Either like the dream collapses pretty quickly because you get so excited of like, I'm dreaming, or it's also sometimes common to be like, that you're dreaming, and then all of a sudden somehow you fall back into just the script of the dream. Like it's almost like you're dreaming, but you actually you just read from the script and you keep going how the dream would have gone.
That's true. Yeah. Do you have a totem, for lack of a better word? Do you have something that happens where you go, oh, this is a dream because that thing happened?
No.
I do.
I have, how do I put this? So I've read some, like a book, I should say, a book on lucid dreaming. It used to happen a lot more when I was in high school. I would have a lot of lucid dreams. I had a decent amount in college, and then I sort of stepped away from it because, extremely short version, I had a dream that lasted like a month, and I came out of it and it was very disorientating.
Wait, like a month? It felt like a month to you? It felt like
it was a month.
That's weird.
And when I came out of it, for the next few days, when I was talking to my roommate, I would reference conversations we had, and he would say, those didn't happen. and I had to basically chalk it up to it must have been in this dream.
That's
so
interesting.
I felt like I flew a little close to the sun and stepped away from it for a little bit.
That's very interesting.
But I'm actually now sort of stepping back into it. I really actually want to reread the book. So it's called Lucid Dreaming. So in terms of a totem, I'm curious on yours, but I don't have a physical object or anything. What I do though is I count my fingers.
Oh, okay.
And so I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I stick my thumbs out to say 5. And it's very common in dreams that you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're kind of like 7 fingers on one hand.
Interesting. I've heard like clocks too are
Timing, clocks and mirrors are super
or windows
interesting.
in general. Windows.
Anything that sort of like reflects or has a view through.
Yeah.
Are weird things in dreamland. What's your totem? What do you?
Mine's teeth.
Oh.
I have a lot of dreams where I lose teeth or have a loose tooth, or something along those lines, and that's usually enough for me to say, my teeth are fine. Something else is happening here.
Yeah.
Now, I've also heard that can be a sign of like stress, which I don't really understand. I'm not really a stressful type of person. I'm pretty easygoing. So I don't know that that's really what it is. But anytime I'm dreaming and I have a tooth get knocked out or something like that, especially if it's of a really weird circumstance of like in the dream, I might wake up and be like, oh, I pulled my tooth out. Boom. That to me is like, that doesn't happen. This is a dream.
Yeah. I think one, it's sort of like a mini totem. It doesn't happen often. If I have homework or I'm late on an assignment, I was super diligent. I was like never late on assignment.
Yeah.
So if I start running into like a panic test of like, what do you mean I'm late on my paper? My brain starts going, this is like something that would happen in a dream. Click.
I have similar ones too where I'm back. I've had all the way back to grade school. Usually though it's high school, and I like don't know where to go to class or something. But then I'll have a thought that says, wait a second. I have a diploma. Like I graduated college. Why am I back in high school? And someone in the dream will be like, oh, well, there was a problem with your credits or something. And I'll sort of figure it out and be like, yeah, but I have the diploma. I don't need to be here. And usually from then on too, I can start to be like, okay, this isn't adding up. Whether or not that means I take control or not is a different question, but it's enough to like, you'd be like, oh, okay, something's wrong.
Yeah, there's also a step called semi-lucidity, which
Maybe
is
that's what it
where
is.
You're more so of like, you're aware it's a dream, but you still just kind of keep going along with the script of the dream.
That's what it is then.
Yeah.
You kind of questioning, but you're like, no, okay.
I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah.
So this is actually super topical for me because since I'm home for the holidays and sleeping not in my bedroom, I have a huge spike in lucid dreams when I'm not in my bedroom. When I'm actually like, when we go up to vacation in Canada.
That's what I just thought of.
Yep. I have the most lucid dreams probably up in Canada. I can remember a very vivid lucid dream when I slept on your floor visiting you in college for St. Patrick's Day. I had like a wild dream one night where I slept on your floor.
Why do you think this is?
For St. Patrick's Day. I don't know. It could be. I've read that when you sleep in a completely new space, you don't get as deep of a sleep because your brain is still slightly aware that you're in a totally new location.
Oh, so it's not convinced that it's safe, maybe?
Well, I want to break those two things.
Okay.
I don't know a tie between lucid dreaming and that. I've read or heard that of like, you don't get as solid of a night's sleep the first night that you sleep somewhere new. Now, I've slept in the bedroom that I slept in the last 2 nights multiple times, but it leads me enough to know that your brain somehow knows when you're not at your complete home base.
But that doesn't surprise me. The caveman version of me goes, it kind of makes sense.
Right. So,
I don't know the threats that are here.
Right.
Whereas my room, I had it all figured out.
Yeah. So I wish I knew more of the fundamentals of how to have lucid dreams because they're just, man, they're pure creativity. They're so much fun. And just a quick tip out there, this is something I do. Once you become lucid, the trick is you rub your hands together. Because that sort of like brings you to present.
Okay.
And you're like, okay, I'm here.
Take
in
notes,
this dream.
people.
Yeah. I'm rubbing my hands together. So 2 nights ago, I had a pretty vivid lucid dream, a strong one. Like, I put it sort of like top 5 for me of like lucid dreams. I became aware. I'm not exactly sure how I became aware. I believe I was like chasing somebody or getting chased. It was sort of like a ridiculous circumstance. And all of a sudden that question of like, well, this feels like a dream. Boom, it was a dream. I rubbed my hands together. And now as somebody who's dabbled with lucid dreams, it's a very interesting space to be in because you have these other characters in your dream, which are just another version of your consciousness or subconsciousness. And it's super, if you just take a step back, it's crazy to think that you can ask a character in your dream a question and you don't know how they're gonna answer because it's all in your head. Like you're asking a part of your brain that's like locked.
Well, it all has to come from your head. Fun fact, every face you ever see in a dream, you've seen in real life.
Really?
Yes. Your brain cannot create faces.
That's it.
So even though you've never maybe talked to them or met them, anybody you strangers in a dream, you've seen them in real life.
That's wild. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So I have a dream journal. In order to have more lucid dreams, I've been journaling my dreams because that's step one. You have to remember your dreams. Lucid dreams are no good if you can't remember them at all. So I've been writing my dreams down. And also, I have a list of questions that I've wanted to ask characters in my dreams.
I love this.
Okay. So I become lucid 2 nights ago. And I think, okay, I've got a list of questions. There are about 5 questions. I can't really remember all 5 of the questions, but I remember the first one. And it's super important to have like very simple questions because you're in a weird space. You got to remember something that's, back on full consciousness, right?
Right, yeah.
Simplistic thing. So I remember one of my questions is I want to ask the characters in the dream, what's the history of consciousness or what's the origin of consciousness? So I get excited. I'm getting too excited, so I calm down. I rub my hands together. I sort of solidify the dream. I find somebody and I say, what is the origin or history of consciousness? And the person looks back at me, this character in my dream says...
Wait. I want to stop you here because this is big, and I just want everyone to know, I don't know what he's about to say, but you primed me with this by saying you asked a question and you got an answer.
Well, I got a...
Well, this person maybe not answered your question, but they spoke back.
They spoke back.
So I just wanted to prime by saying I'm on the edge of my seat because I want to know what was said.
Yes. Okay. So I asked a character. I can't really put a face to the character. It's kind of I'm just talking to a person. I say, "What is the history, the origin of consciousness?" And they look back at me and say something along the lines of, "That's a good question. I don't really know. Let's find somebody who does know." Which is a weird thing that I need to find a different character in my dream to tell me this. Now, I would not bring the story up if it ended there. Don't worry. So now we're looking for different people, and I'm kind of asking various different characters of like, do you know who would know the answer to this question? Something tells me internally within me that I need to find like a mentor or an older looking person. Somebody that's like, going to be a personification of like a knowledgeable individual. So I'm walking through and I'm at now like a kind of looking commencement speech where there's a ton of people on one side of the room and a stage with a podium. And I see the person at the podium is one of my English professors from college. And I think, bang, that's a professor in my mind. That person's going to know a lot. So I walk up. I can even see in my mind. I know who this professor is. I can see his face. Like, boom. So I walk up and I say, what is the history or origin of consciousness? And they respond, with something along the lines of like, that's an interesting question. What sort of do you think? And I asked, well, is consciousness a miracle? Because it's something I've talked about with people in life of like, as a non-religious person, I don't really believe in miracles, but the idea of just like matter creating an experience is the closest thing to sort of like a miracle I can think of. So I say to him, is it a miracle? And the response, my professor responds with...
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Did you wake up and write this down right away?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to see if there was downtime or if you...
I woke up and wrote 4 pages in my journal.
Dang. Okay.
Because this was one of like 5 dreams I had in the night.
Sweet. Okay.
So they responded with something along the lines of this. If consciousness generated out of matter instantaneously, that seems like a miracle. But if it slowly, methodically developed all over the world in different ways and hit failures and endpoints along the way, would you really consider that a miracle?
Sounds like the scientific method, honestly.
Well, and so that was the question back. And then from there, things get weird and dreamy, where I'm sort of pondering. And then when I look back to my professor, it's Don Cheadle. Like things sort of get crazy. And like after that, I don't have like productive things to add to this.
We were on our backwards landing Oprah plane.
That's Kyle Cease.
Or Kyle Cease, yeah.
Kyle Cease has some great jokes about that. But I remember enough of the dream that I thought it was a very interesting reaction where they sort of slowed it down back to me to say something now that is like, yeah, I guess that's true when I think about it, but also is kind of profound and weird coming out of left field of like, if matter just instantaneously got experience, that feels like a miracle. Versus if I went through this path of failures and versions of all of these sort of things, that feels more like natural selection and evolution.
I was to say we're right back to a religion versus evolution argument, but said in a more profound way.
Yes. And it sort of makes me fall back. Well, if evolution is true and we think natural selection is true, it sort of tips me into the hand. That's a little bit how consciousness came to its form today, but I have no hard evidence of that.
Which is, I've never actually thought though of like consciousness as we're describing it, or your spirit, or your just whatever. I've never thought about that going through like a trial and error process.
So this got me thinking about it. It made me really sad to think that there was one individual that was the first conscious being trying to talk to other beings, but it was alone.
Ooh, that's heavy.
Like going around and trying to get other people to understand what it means to like
it'd be like you trying to go talk to a bunch of monkeys.
Yeah, that's so sad.
Yeah, that's weird. But eventually you had to get more, or mate with one. Make more conscious monkeys.
Yeah, but I mean, just like I also think about like the people who first invented language, are alone in their sort of language.
Well, but I think that happens very tribally.
Yeah.
Whereas it'd be a community that would invent language.
True. That's a more interaction of.
And it's pretty easy to like point and grunt and stuff. I think you'd be amazed actually about how far you could get by just like pointing and making noises.
Or playing charades, really.
Or playing charades, yeah, exactly. And so that community would all of a sudden be like, okay, well, this grunt means this thing, and it becomes like shorthand of shorthand of shorthand, and that's really what language is. But yeah, I've just never thought about it that way of like being the first to break the barrier, and then being alone, is kind of wild.
So.
Wow.
Yeah, my question to the listeners who listen to this. And
you got a closing statement?
Want to write in? Well, what questions do you want me to ask lucid version of me?
Oh, that's a great, yeah.
And I will say again, I have these lucid dreams probably once every 4 months, 6 months. It's not super frequent, so I won't I won't be updating of like this. It hasn't happened. But I will write the question down and I will do my best to remember it. And if I have an experience, you better believe I will bring it to the mic.
If anybody has a question for Zach, you can email us at forbiddendinnertable@gmail.com.
Yes, we will take any and all of your questions.
We will take comments, feedback. If you've got questions for Zach to ask in his lucid dreams, we'll take it all. Send us your thoughts, and we'll be happy to address them. But this was a really fun one.
I didn't know where we were going to go, right? Biocentrism is just a topic that can lead to so many different doors, but I feel like we touched on the areas I wanted to touch on, and I feel like we kind of hit consciousness from a cool angle, and I'm sure we'll come back to talk about different aspects of this in the future.
I don't know if it's just because we're in person, but this felt more fun.
Yeah,
or maybe it was the topic. Kind of fun and out there, but
a mix of both.
This is a good one.
It's cool too because you get to kind of build weird on top of weird on this one.
I like weird, but we're not afraid to go there.
That's right. Send us in your weird questions. That was the Forbidden Dinner Table.
Just Forbidden Dinner Table
@gmail.com.
@gmail.com. Awesome. Forbidden Dinner Table @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening. Any words of wisdom, Alex, to close us out with?
I'll go to my go-to wisdom phrase, which I don't think I've said on the podcast yet, which is try everything once.
Try everything once. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic, safe rest of your week whenever you're listening to this.
Thank you for listening.